All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try not to keep you too long this afternoon because I think for many of you all, this is the second time you're hearing my voice today. So we'll get right to it. Just want to go over a few things with this presentation just to clear up some things, some of the questions we've been getting this week. If you think of anything else along the way, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to address those as well. So what are we talking about today? Three main things that I'm going to be addressing. First is the Texas.gov process. We've had a lot of questions about Texas.gov and updates to voter registration information. So I went through the process myself this afternoon and updated my own voter registration. Sorry, Travis County, if you're there, I'm already registered and you're getting another record for me. But I just to demo the process so that I could take some screenshots so y'all could see what it looks like and I could explain a few nuances to it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is briefly, again, validating personal identification information in team, just a couple of things to be aware of there. And then finally, the questions about the corrective action process, because as you know, those seem to be the questions of the hour right now. So let's jump right in on it. All right, so Texas.gov. So what I did here is I went through and did an update for myself so that I could show you all some screenshots of what a voter is going to see when they go into Texas.gov to make an update to their name, address, or in this case, the context in which we're talking about it is how they're using it to add personal identification information to their voter registration record. So, and I should have put I should have put a screenshot before this, but you go to actually the website Texas.gov, and on the front page of Texas.gov is information about updating your voter registration. When you click on the link that takes you to the update page, this is what you see. So I would just want to point out that it indicates on here about 2/3 of the way down the page, to use the service, you need your current driver's license or ID card, social security number, voter registration card VUID number. When you get to this page, it just kind of gives you a little bit of an explanation as to what to expect, but just note that it's telling voters right there what they need. They have to hit the continue button down at the bottom. When they hit continue, this is the login screen that they see. So just note that there's a place where the voter enters their driver's license or personal identification number, date of birth, the last 4 digits of their social security number, their audit number, which is the number that's contained on their driver's license, their VUID. If a voter doesn't know their VUID, but presumably knows their driver's license number because they're using it to log into this system, they can go to votetexas.gov and go to the My Voter portal to look up their voter registration information. All they need there is their DL and date of birth. And if they do that, they can call up their voter registration record on texas.gov to get their VUID, which is actually what I did on one of the times that I logged into this. So they put their VUID and then they indicate their county name. The next thing they're going to do is hit the login button on the bottom left-hand side. When they hit login, they get to this page. And you can see it's me. Welcome, Christina Adkins. You have to answer the following 3 questions. These are affirmation statements that you see on the voter registration application, whether they're a U.S. citizen, whether they're 18 years of age before Election Day, and then if they're interested in working as an election worker. And then it takes you to this page. And this is where the voter has to make a selection. They have to select one of these items: name change, address change, or change both. For voters, the easiest thing to do is to hit name change. So this is what I did. Click on name change. And this is what populates. Like, it'll pull up your name as it's listed in team. Please note, you do not have to change anything, but you do have to re-enter the information in those fields. So you would have to go through and re-enter your name in here. So even if you're not changing your name, you do have to re-enter that information so that the system picks it up as a change, as the record being changed. It's got a place for contact information. I included mine when I did my update. It's not included here, but the voter can add certain types of pieces of contact information. And then there's a blue box down on the left. Once they've re-entered their name, they hit the change button. And then this is the screen that comes up. It's a confirmation screen. In this confirmation screen, it shows what it is that the voter did. And it's a very long screen. That's why I have the screenshot split up into 2 places. But it confirms the name, what was current, what was proposed. And you can see I didn't change anything. I just re-entered my name, actually my last name. And then you scroll down and it has, if they were updating their residence address, it would have information about their old address and new address. You scroll all the way down. It shows you how I answer those questions. And then down at the bottom, there's a button, and you either submit changes or edit changes. And it seems like this is the part where we're hearing maybe some voters that are getting some confusion, is they're getting to this screen and they're not scrolling down to the bottom to hit the submit changes. So they need to make sure that they scroll all the way down and hit the submit changes button. When they hit submit changes, they're going to get another page that pops up that looks just like that one, but it's going to say receipt up at the top. So if you're walking voters through that, just make sure that you're telling them that they go all the way through and hit submit changes to make sure they get receipt at the top. Now, if you'll notice, I did not re-enter in the change area my driver's license or social security number. That is because I already entered that in when I was authenticating. So when I hit submit changes, my information that I indicated on there, my name, and those personal identification numbers that I used to validate my identity when I logged into Texas.gov are going to be sent out to the county. So that record is going to include the numbers that I used for authentication. So while Texas.gov, the driver's license information might have both my DL and SSN, if TEAM doesn't have both DL and SSN, the voter can still log into Texas.gov, go through this process, hit submit changes, and then that new record that's sent to the county will have the updated DL and SSN that can be appended to TEAM. So just want to make sure we're real clear on that process and that we give everybody a visual so you can see how it works. Feel free to use this presentation, have a copy of it, in your office in case somebody calls, you can walk them through the process. Or I encourage you to consider doing it on your own. Go through and walk through the change process so that you can see what it's like and you understand maybe some of the situations your voters might be put under. So if they call and ask questions, you can talk them through it. That's the other thing I recommend. Okay, next question on availability of social security numbers and driver's license numbers. So we're still hearing reports from counties that their offline vendor hasn't updated their local data to include all the required DLs and SSNs that TEAM currently contains. There's a lot of confusion about this, and I just want to make it very clear that we provided this file in January to offline counties, and if you are a county that doesn't have that updated information in your system, that's something that you need to discuss with your vendor, because the data has been provided, but we can't speak to what happens after the data has been provided, how that processing works in getting that into your local files. But my point here is, if that's the case, if your information hasn't been updated into your local system, then you should be checking voters' personal identification information in TEAM in addition to checking it within your own system. If you are not checking in both places, then it is very possible that your voters could have their carrier envelopes improperly rejected, because it may be that we have those numbers and you're just not seeing that number because it's not in your system, but it's inside the TEAM system. So please, please, please make sure that you're checking in both places. This is the thing that you should do to help your voters. This is the most voter-friendly thing, and arguably, or not arguably, I would say is what is required by law to validate this information off their official voter registration record. So just make sure you're checking both places. I know that that's a little bit of extra work for some counties, but it's to help your voters. It gives them the greatest opportunity of making sure that their applications, and now that most applications are completed, we're talking about the carrier envelope, gives them the best opportunity of making sure that carrier envelope is accepted. Okay, couple of questions now about the corrective action process. This is a question that's come up several times this week. What if the early voting clerk is looking at a ballot or a sealed carrier envelope, and they think that carrier envelope may be empty? So this is a tricky scenario, and we've talked through this. We spent quite a bit of time today actually going through the code and looking at different provisions to try to provide a very solid answer here. So I would say, and I have to be real clear, we've got to rely on what the law tells us here. There's nothing in the law that allows you or tells you that you can notify a voter that you think their carrier envelope doesn't contain a voted ballot. And that's because you can't open that carrier envelope to see if the voted ballot was included or not. So because there's no mechanism for you opening that ballot to confirm that, that carrier envelope is ultimately going to have to be sent to the ballot board, and the ballot board will process it. If, however, this is kind of another twist on this scenario, If a voter were to discover that they didn't include the ballot, maybe they call your office and they say, I sent my carrier envelope in, but I forgot to put the ballot inside there. What do I do? Because they have the ballot in their possession still, I think it is absolutely proper to instruct that voter that they can surrender the ballot and vote a regular ballot in person. They can use that ballot to surrender and cancel and vote a ballot in person. So just want to be real clear is that the authority for you to proactively notify voters about a situation that may or may not be the case is not really authorized under the law because you don't have the authority to open up that envelope. So just be careful there. But when you're answering questions for voters about their ballot, if they bring this to your attention, if they discover this, then you do have an avenue for giving them an option to do something different in that scenario. Okay, so now we're going to talk cancellation a little bit. If an early voting clerk is notifying a voter of a defect in their carrier envelope, and the voter indicates maybe they're notifying them by phone in this situation. Actually, this is absolutely what they're doing. They're notifying them by phone or email of a defect. And say the voter contacts your office or is on the phone with you and they indicate, oh no, I can't believe I left that information off. But I think I'd rather just cancel my mail ballot and vote in person. What are the steps that voter needs to take to cancel their mail ballot in this scenario where an early voting clerk is notifying voter of a defect by phone? So the easiest, cleanest thing to do is the following. The voter should appear in person to the early voting clerk's office and complete the top box on the cancellation form, Form 6-6. And that top box is what they complete, and you'll notice we indicated that on there. On the form where it gives the code provisions, it says 86.011D. That's the statutory authority for this process. So they're going to complete that top portion. When they complete that top portion, you're going to issue them a notice of surrendered ballot, just like you would if it was a corrective action, cancellation, spurned by ballot board notifications. Once that voter has that notice of surrendered ballot, they're able to vote a regular ballot in person. So if this is happening during early voting and your main early voting location is right there in your office, they would do the cancellation right there and be able to vote a regular ballot. If your early voting, main early voting clerk's office is maybe, adjacent or connected to, your main early voting location, then those voters would need to take that notice of surrendered ballot to any early voting location. It doesn't have to be the main early voting location, or they could wait and take it to their polling place on election day. They provide that notice of surrendered ballot to the presiding judge, and they'd be allowed to vote a regular ballot in person. Okay, here's another scenario though. If an early voting clerk notifies a voter of a defect and that voter never shows up to correct that defect, what do you do with the mail ballot? So let's say you as early voting clerk said, hey voter, I'm calling you to let you know that you forgot to include your personal identification information. Voter says, okay, I'm going to show up and take care of it, but they never show up. So they have up until, because you're the early voting clerk notifying them, they have up until election day to appear to provide that information, because at that point you have to give the ballot to the ballot board. Any ballots that are in your possession have to go to ballot board no later than election day so that they can be qualified, reviewed, and possibly counted by election night. So in that scenario, you need to provide that carrier envelope to the ballot board for review. And that may be that you're doing so on election day. At that point, the ballot board has the option of also contacting the voter to notify the voter of a defect. So you may have called and notified them, they didn't come in, you send it to ballot board can look at this and say, oh, we're gonna try calling the voter too. If ballot board attempts to contact the voter and notify them of the defect, then the voter has until the 6th day after election day to correct that defect. So it gives them a little bit more time. So it's possible that notification could be provided by both the early voting clerk and the ballot board to these particular voters that have defects. If an early voting clerk notifies a voter of a defect on the carrier envelope, can a voter vote in person at a polling place without first coming to the early voting clerk's office to cancel? So if you call a voter and say, voter, you're missing your personal identification number, and they say, great, I'm going to cancel, but I can't make it to your early voting clerk's office to do so, what does the voter do? So if they don't first go to your office to complete the cancellation work and get that notice of surrendered ballot, then they can go to a polling location and they're only allowed to vote provisionally. And that's because the law says now that unless they surrender that mail ballot, they have to vote provisionally. And we know that when they're coming to cancel in your office, you have possession of that early voting ballot. you're confirming that you have possession of it, and that's what that notice of surrendered ballot is. It's a confirmation to the polling place worker that we know where that ballot is, that it has been essentially surrendered by the voter, and so they're able to vote in person. If they don't do that and they go straight to a polling place, their only vote option is to vote provisionally. However, that voter, because they were notified of a defect in accordance with 86011D, there's specific statutory authority for them to receive that notice of a defect from the clerk and to subsequently cancel based on that information. The voter should also complete the request to cancel mail ballot. So it's the same process that they would follow if a ballot board notifies them of a defect and they show up to vote in person without going to your office to cancel first. It's the same process if whether you notify the voter or the ballot board notifies the voter. They can go and vote provisionally, but they should also complete the request to cancel mail ballot. It's real important that if you were able to if you're able to make sure that your workers know that they should mark that reason on the provisional, the correct reason on the provisional ballot, indicating that, they're voting because they were on the list of having voted by mail, but they didn't surrender their ballot or whatnot. If you want, you can even have your workers make an extra little designation or provide a note that says voter notified of defect or something like that, just so that you know it's somebody that falls under these situations. Those are all the specific questions I have. I just want to remind everybody that all of our updated forms are posted in our forms manual. We've got a specific listing that says selected new and updated forms at the top. Some of them are also incorporated, so they're duplicated in there. So they're also incorporated in the forms manual, but a lot of them are just placed up here just to make it easy for you all to find these newer forms at this point in the process. Within a few months, they're all going to be fully incorporated, and this section may go away, but it's not going to be for a while. We just want to make this stuff easy for you to find here at the beginning as we roll out these new processes. And then our webinar recordings. All of our webinars are being recorded, and we're posting those on our website under our training and educational resources page. And just know that it lists a link to the presentation itself, an audio recording. The password for all of our webinars that were from this year, our elections 2022. As you can see, we have a pattern. It's not a big secret. It's just there's no way to post it without some kind of password, but it's not a secret password, so to speak. If we could post it without that, we would. The date of the recording, and then a PDF of the presentation. So that's all I had that I wanted to address. I'm going to take a minute now and look at the chat and Q&A and see if there's some things there that we can address for you. First question is actually a fantastic question, and I wish that I thought to put it in the presentation myself. It's about the certificate of appointment for poll watchers. So I'm going to take just a second to summarize what it is that your poll watchers need to have with you, or have with them when they appear to be a poll watcher. Please note that poll watchers, when they're coming to engage in poll watching activities, have to present two things to you. They need to have their certificate of appointment, and so that certificate of appointment must, be filled out. Part of it's filled out ahead of time, part of it's filled out in the presence of the presiding judge, but that certificate of appointment needs to indicate where they're being appointed to watch. So if they're being appointed to a polling place, an election day polling place, it needs to say that. If they're being appointed to the ballot board or to central count, it needs to say that. And they need to have a separate form for each poll watching location in which they want to serve, like central count versus ballot board versus polling locations, because that form is surrendered to the presiding judge. That presiding judge retains a copy of it, so they can't use the same form multiple times. In addition to that certificate of appointment, they also need to have their certificate of completion of the SOS poll watcher training. And that's a form that they get on our website by completing our training that they can that they're now required to complete. If poll watchers are asking where to complete that training, they can go to votetexas.gov, click on the Get Involved tab, and then there's a link to the poll watcher information from there. So great questions. I'm so glad somebody asked about poll watchers. Let's see here. Let me see if there's anything else. Bear with me just a moment. A great question. Okay, this is another one about the corrective action process and the ID requirements. So the question is, if we have in our system the social security number for the voter, and they use the social security number on their application, but use their driver's license on their ballot, and you can confirm that they have their driver's license on the ballot. Can you instruct the ballot board that you have that information? Absolutely. The numbers that they put on the ABBM and on the carrier don't have to be the same numbers. They just have to match what's in the voter registration record. So you could use DL on one, you could use SSN on the other. As long as those numbers match your voter registration record, then it's fine. Good question. Let's see here. This is a good question. Suggestions on redacting driver's license, since we have to have it now for ballot board to review. So remember that now these carrier envelopes and ABBMs have personally identifiable information on there. And so when people are acting in their official capacity, because this is a required validation step they have to take in order to process these mail ballots, that information, should be visible for those workers, because they need to know that information in order to do their job. However, remember that this is confidential information, and there are restrictions under the Public Information Act on providing that information to individual requesters regarding public information, individual requesters of information or documents that are subject to Public Information Act process. So just know that you will have to if somebody's asking for copies of ABBMs, you're going to have to redact that driver's license information and maybe other types of personal identification information, depending on what they put on there, prior to providing that. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but that's probably the best I can do right now. Great question. What if a poll watcher shows up and they present an old certificate of appointment? So I think the main thing that you would need to do, we want to try to be helpful to the poll watchers, and it may be hard for them to go get another signature of an appointing authority when they're in that moment, particularly if it's on election day. So if somebody presents the old poll watcher certificate, what's missing on there is the new poll watcher oath that they have to take. And so I think that your presiding judge could either, take a new form if they have it and attach it to that poll watcher certificate and have the poll watcher maybe sign both forms. Or I think that, and this is probably the scenario that we're going to see the most, they could orally administer that oath and read the oath to the poll watcher, make them repeat the oath back, and then I think they could probably add a designation on the certificate of appointment indicating that the new required oath for poll watchers was orally administered by the presiding judge. And that would be a way to make sure that poll watchers are getting access to their locations without sending them away when they have an old certificate, because maybe the appointing authority provided an old certificate to them. Good question. What happens if a poll watcher gets out a phone in a polling place? Well, that's one of the things that the poll watcher is acknowledging, is that they shouldn't be having those recording devices. And I think my recommendation would be to try to work with that poll watcher, talk to them, tell them that they're violating the procedures under the election code and that they need to put the phone away. If a poll watcher continues to pull out a phone or continues to use a phone in the polling place after they've been warned, I think that's when you want your presiding judge in that location may look to their authority to expel a poll watcher from a polling place if they're repeatedly violating the law after warnings from the presiding judge. Another question is, if somebody's reviewing a ballot by mail application and you confirm that the information that they provided on that application matches the voter registration record, can you write on that application or include something that shows the other ID that was on file so that the ballot board has access to it in case the voter uses a different ID on each document? And I think the short answer to that is yes, that if you need to provide that information to your ballot board in whatever way is going to make sense for you and the ballot board in getting that information. And I've heard about counties that are writing that information down or completing those records on the front end. I'm always real hesitant to tell people that they can write on an application that's been submitted by that voter because it's now a document that's in your possession and it's an official document for the election. So I don't think there's anything that prohibits it, but I would be very careful about documenting that on the actual application itself. If you do choose to document it on the application itself, make sure that you are making it very clear that this is additional information that was added. I would also include an indication of who added that information. Maybe the person in your work or in your office that's adding it, or you as early voting clerk will sign off, added, by, you know, Christina Adkins on this date or something like that. I've heard of a lot of counties that are providing some additional documentation to help their ballot boards too, rather than writing it on the application. Question about camera-ready updated voter applications. If you need a copy of the application that's camera-ready for your county, which means it has your county information and your county barcoding on there, so if you want to get them printed up on your own, just shoot us an email and we can get you that application that's specific to your county. Great question. So if talking back on slide 14, I'm going to scroll back to that so people can see this, the question here. So in this situation where a voter was notified of a defect, what 86011D it says is that the voters that are notified of a defect specifically have the authority to cancel and cancel that mail ballot and vote in person. So because they're not going through the proper cancellation steps or I wouldn't say proper, because they're not going through the specific cancellation steps that allow them to vote a regular ballot in person, it doesn't mean that they don't still have options. The law very much acknowledges that because 84035 specifically talks about voting provisionally in certain circumstances for cancellation. So in this scenario where they don't have a ballot to surrender, they didn't come to your office to get that notice of surrendered ballot as proof. They're going to the polling location, they're voting provisionally and completing that request to cancel ballot by mail form. That information is going to come back to you. It's going to ultimately go to the ballot board. That provisional ballot, you know, remember, we're telling the voter that they have a defect on their carrier envelope. So their ballot's not going to get counted because of that defect. So in that scenario, we would treat this as a proper cancellation because they've filled out the paperwork. They're just voting provisionally because they don't have the ballot to surrender right there in that location. So that would be a proper cancellation, and that voter's provisional ballot would be able to be counted. Good question. I'm glad you asked that because I want to make sure that everyone's understanding that. All right, bear with me just 1 second. I can't see my chat feature very well. I got to put it in full screen view so I can pull that chat box out. Or I'm sorry, not chat, Q&A. So I am pausing just to get the right screen in front of me. There we go. Now I can see all your questions. I can only scroll down so much. Okay, here we go. Let's see here. So the question is what if a voter doesn't have a Texas driver's license or Texas ID? So if they don't have those, then the texas.gov option is not something that's available to that voter. So texas.gov is contingent on that person having a personal ID card or driver's license. I believe even an expired driver's license or personal identification card will work. They'll be able to log into the system that way, but they have to have that because that's how we're obtaining that personal identification information. So another question about local political subdivisions, like how do people in smaller political subdivisions like school districts and water districts and cities verify this information in team when they're processing ballot by mail applications and carrier envelopes and whatnot? So this is something that you're going to have to work with your county on. We're not being so prescriptive to make it a very set process as to how you get that information. If you look at our advisory that we issued, the original advisory on the corrective action process, we do have some suggestions and some information in there. But I would say if you are a local entity and you are contracting with your county, I would recommend that you get in contact with your county election officer. I'm sorry, if you're a local entity that does not contract with your county, I recommend that you get involved or get in contact, my goodness, with your county election officer and talk to them about some things that you can do to help get that information. You know, if we're talking about annual ABVMs, you can assume that the information that's provided to you from the counties has been validated, so you can just use that to validate off your carrier envelopes off of. Alternatively, you may want to work out a system or a date and time by which you can take things to their office to get them validated, or maybe even perform some validations over the phone. So anyway, just wanted to let you know that there's some options in that corrective action advisory, so take a look at that. And you know, if you and your county election officer, when working together, or if you are the county election officer, when you're working with your local political subdivisions, if you've got some ideas or discover something that works well for you all in coming up with that process, please share that with our office so that we can share that with other counties and consider, you know, utilizing, you know, I know that many of our county election officials have a listserv that they use to share some of those ideas, because what works in one county, you know, may not work in another county. So we at the Secretary of State's office have to be real careful about being too prescriptive on some of these things, because we just know that the process is going to vary from county to county depending on population and geography and whatnot. Okay. Let's see here. Looks like there was a team question that Christy answered. Thank you, Christy. Let's see here. So an unfortunate scenario, we've actually had plenty of calls like this in our office too, saying if you notify a voter by a defect, and what if the voter is angry and they get mad and they say, well, I'm disabled and I can't vote in person, that's why they're voting by mail. I think in that scenario, you know, what I would remind that voter is, you know, you're just trying to give them options and give them notification of that situation. You know, there are a lot of individuals in the community, or they might have some friends and family members that can help get them to a curbside vote, or help get them to a voting location. You know, this corrective action process is something that didn't exist before, and so this is a new process. I mean, it's a benefit that voters are getting that didn't previously exist, and it's so hard to be on that call when you've got voters that are angry. And I'm sorry if you had a difficult caller. Believe me, I understand we get voters that call us about this stuff too. I think the most you can do is just tell them about what their options are. Remember, they can, you know, vote in person, they can cancel. Always remember to tell people about curbside voting, because that, you know, for individuals that are voting by reason of disability, it's very possible that curbside voting may apply to them. Just give them the options, because, you know, situations may change and they might be able to get someone to assist them if they need assistance. So another question, if a person wrote a note and returned the ballot saying she decided she did not wish to vote in the primary at all, is that acceptable? So I think we're talking about like a cancellation option. I probably would want to talk to you, Rachel, call our office and ask and speak to one of the attorneys about this, because I would want to know a little bit more about what she put on that note maybe, to make sure that we're telling you how to process it the right way. It's a good question though. And Christy answered questions about camera ready applications. Thank you. See here. Okay, this is a fantastic question. Oh my gosh, thank you for asking this question. It's about defects in ABBMs. So this person's saying that they received some this morning that are complete except for the party they want to vote for. This ID information, the ID information's there, but they just forgot to indicate their party affiliation. Are we allowed to call the voter for this? There's no way for them to receive our rejection in a new ABBM by tomorrow. What's the best way to handle this? Great question. So anytime you as an early voting clerk are opting to not notify voters of any additional information, well, first I'll say you have to send that notice of rejection. I think by law you have to give that information. You have to send it out in writing because it is a rejected ABBM. It's not complete at this point. There isn't like a separate correction process for this type of reason or type of election information being missing. But anytime an early voting clerk is wanting to do something above and beyond sending that notice of rejected ABBM, it's important that you know that what you do for one, that you do for all. So be uniform and consistent. You want to make sure that you're not just notifying some voters by phone of problems, that anybody that falls into that category, you're treating them the same and also providing, you know, the same options to them. Oh, and I think I answered that one about smaller political subdivisions. Okay, here's another good question. We're receiving ballots without the carrier envelope. So people are mailing their ballots back but not sending them in the carriers. Are we supposed to contact the voter of this error? So under 86011D in the election code, this is a provision, I know I've mentioned it several times, it allows you to help notify voters of defects. What that provision says is that if the ballot or the carrier envelope they submit doesn't comply with the applicable requirements essentially of the code, then you can notify the voter of this defect. I would, if I were you. If they did not include a carrier, that ballot's going to be rejected. So if this is somebody that voted by mail and you've got a record of them requesting a mail ballot and that application's good and you properly sent out the mail ballot to them, and for whatever reason they didn't include the carrier, I would definitely let them know about it. You could either mail the ballot back to the voter, or you can call them and talk to them and let them know, and they can either come in person or cancel their mail ballot. So this person asked, excuse me, we just opened an application that has their VUID but no DL and SSN. Do we reject? It will be the third time it has been rejected. That's correct. If you do not have a driver's license or social security number, then you have to reject that ABBM. I know there's been some confusion with VUID numbers. People are trying to provide a VUID, but that's just not one of those authorized personal identification numbers. Next question, good one. Can a voter provide a TDL or SSN to cure an ABBM after the 2/18/2022 deadline? And the answer to that is no. I mean, the deadline is tomorrow. It's a receipt deadline. It's not like the voter registration deadline, which is a postmark deadline, so people have a little bit of extra time. That deadline is far more stricter. It's a receipt deadline, and that's in part because it takes time for ballots to get mailed back and forth. And so no, I would say that all of your ABBMs have to be complete. That information has to be complete tomorrow. If it's not completed by tomorrow, then it would just be a straight up rejected ABBM. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. I think I've got just about everything. Okay, a few more things popped in the chat. Let me see here. Looks like the same question a couple of times. A question about the ABBMs that were sent to our office. As many of you all know, there was a campaign that had a lot of ABBMs that were addressed to our office. I think my understanding is that we believe the bulk of those have been mailed out to the counties, or let me rephrase that. Everything that we have has been mailed out to the counties. We're turning them around the same day, but the mail has kind of trickled down quite a bit. So we believe that the bulk of those that have been in the mail have been received by our office and already sent out to counties. Again, anything that we get that day, we're turning around immediately. So we're trying to get that out as quickly as possible. But we'll definitely keep you all posted on that. Another question, if a person signs a carrier envelope before they seal it, should you mail it back to the voter? That's going to be a little bit fact specific. That depends to me, that would depend on how much of the signature is obscured by the flap that's closed and whether that part of the flap could be removed in a way that would reveal the signature without messing it up. Because that happens from time to time, and I think that you can either look to see how much of the signature you can see and use that for signature comparison purposes or to meet the signature requirements. And I've heard of ballot boards that have been able to, carefully remove the part that's covering the signature to be able to see what they need to see. Okay, I think I have answered all the questions that I see. I know Keith and Christy are on the line. If they saw something that I didn't and they wanted to answer, or if they had anything else that they wanted to add, I wanted to make sure I gave them the opportunity to do that. Keith, Christy, anything else y'all wanted to add today?
No, I don't have anything. Looks like you covered it all.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'm not on my side. I think I've tried to grab the things that I could.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, that's all we have for today, y'all. Thanks so much for the call, for those of y'all that called in and the questions. They're great questions. I will remind everybody we're doing this again next week. My request is that, I want everyone to start thinking as much as they can about potential ballot board questions that you think that you might receive, or the questions that your ballot board is coming to you now. If you're seeing trends like that, please be sure to send the questions our way. For those of y'all that are on your listserv and active, if you see things on the listserv that seem to repeatedly be coming up, please send me those questions and I can make sure that I'm including this in our presentation next week. Have a wonderful afternoon, y'all. Thanks again for your time and attention, and thank you so much for all the hard work that you're doing right now. We very much appreciate all of the work that our election officials are doing to, prepare and make sure that this primary is successful. So thank you all. Let us know if you have any other additional questions.